They forced her to marry a man who had everything: money, power, the kind of fear that made people look away when he entered a room. Everyone thought she'd won, but 10 years later, every single person involved wished she hadn't. Betty Jacobs learned something at 23 that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Certainty can be more suffocating than doubt. Her family called it security. Christopher Allen called it betrayal. Nathan Krylov called it an acquisition. She called it the end. The day her father sat her down in his study, Betty's hands were cold. Not from temperature, from the way he wouldn't look at her directly, the way his jaw worked before he spoke. "Christopher's a dreamer," her father said. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Dreams don't pay for your mother's treatments." Betty's throat tightened. The medical bills were stacked on the corner of his desk. Real, numbered, due. "Nathan Krylov has made an offer." The name landed like a fist. Everyone knew Nathan Krylov. What he did. Who disappeared. "I didn't ask for this," Betty whispered. Her father finally looked at her. "I'm asking you to do it anyway." Betty's hands went numb. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything. She just didn't know the cost yet. Before we begin, have you ever made a choice that felt right in the moment, but years later, you're still living with the consequences? This story isn't about heroes or villains. It's about two people who chose safety over risk, certainty over faith, and what that cost them. If you've stayed up at night wondering what if, you're going to feel this one. Let's go back to where it all started. Christopher's apartment smelled like coffee and optimism. He always kept the windows open, even in winter. Said it reminded him they were still building something. Betty stood in the doorway, her coat still on, her hands buried in her pockets because if she took them out, they'd shake. "Hey." Christopher looked up from his laptop, grinning. "I was just thinking about you." Her stomach turned, not from disgust, from knowing what came next. "We need to talk." His smile faltered. People only said that when the talk wasn't actually a conversation. He closed the laptop slowly, buying time, maybe hoping the pause would change her mind. "It's my family," Betty started. Her voice sounded flat, rehearsed. It was. She'd practiced in the mirror for an hour. "They want me to marry someone else." Christopher laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative that she was serious was impossible. "You're joking." "I'm not." The silence stretched. Christopher stood, crossed the room, stopped 3 feet away, close enough to reach for her, far enough to prove he wouldn't. "Who?" "Nathan Krylov." Christopher's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists at his sides, then released. The name wasn't just a person. It was a warning, a reputation, a world Betty didn't belong to. "And you're considering it?" Betty's chest tightened. "My mom." "Your mom wouldn't want this." His voice cracked. "You know she wouldn't. She needs treatments, expensive ones. My dad can't. So we figure it out." Christopher stepped closer, finally reaching for her hands. They were still cold. He rubbed them between his palms like friction could solve everything. "We always figure it out, Betty. That's what we do." She pulled away. That small movement, that half step back, told him everything. "You've already decided." His voice went quiet, the kind of quiet that made her ribs ache. Betty wanted to lie, to give him hope, to soften it. But hope was the cruelest thing she could offer right now. "I haven't, but I'm thinking about it." Christopher turned away, hands in his hair, pacing. When he finally looked back, his eyes were wet. "Do you love me?" "That's not fair." "Do you?" "Yes." The word came out strangled. "But love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't save my mom. Love doesn't. Love is supposed to be enough." He wasn't yelling. Somehow that made it worse. Betty's throat burned. For who? The question hung between them, unanswered, because they both knew the truth. Love was enough for poets, for movies, for people who didn't watch their parents drown in debt. Christopher sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "If you do this, Betty, if you marry him, we're done. You know that, right?" She nodded, her vision blurred. "I need you to leave," he whispered. Betty didn't move. Couldn't. If she left now, it was real. "Please," Christopher added, and the word broke something fundamental between them. She turned toward the door, her hand on the knob, counted to 10, then 20. 30 seconds of silence where he could take it back, could fight, could give her a reason that outweighed everything pressing down on her chest. He didn't say anything. Betty left. The Krylov estate wasn't a home. It was a statement. Marble floors that echoed when you walked, chandeliers that cost more than Betty's childhood house, windows that overlooked the city like a predator watching prey. Nathan stood at the bar when she arrived, pouring vodka into a crystal glass. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her presence, just let her stand there in the doorway, waiting. It was a test. Everything with Nathan was a test. "Your father speaks highly of you," he finally said, still not looking. "Says you're smart, loyal." Betty's nails dug into her palms. "He wants me to marry you." "I know." Nathan turned, glass in hand, eyes scanning her like she was a contract he was considering signing. "The question is whether you want to marry me. Does it matter?" A smile ghosted across his face. Not warm, amused. "Honesty. I appreciate that." He crossed the room, stopping close enough that Betty had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He was taller than Christopher, broader, older. Everything about him felt calculated, controlled, dangerous. "I can give you things," Nathan said quietly. "Security, comfort, respect." He paused. "Your mother will never worry about medical bills again." Betty's breath caught. "But if you marry me, you're mine. Completely. No looking back at what could have been. No wondering about the boy who couldn't provide." His fingers brushed her chin, lifting it. "Can you live with that?" She should have said no, should have run. But instead, her mind flashed to her mother's hollow cheeks, her father's trembling hands as he signed loan papers, Christopher's apartment, with its optimism and empty promises. Yes, the word tasted like metal, like blood, like the end of something she couldn't name. Nathan's thumb traced her jaw. Good. The wedding was small, efficient, transactional. Betty wore white, because that's what was expected. The dress fit perfectly. Nathan had hired someone to ensure it. Everything about this marriage was managed, controlled, predetermined. Christopher didn't attend. She knew he wouldn't. But when the officiant asked if anyone objected, her breath caught anyway. Her eyes flicked to the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It stayed closed. When Nathan slid the ring onto her finger, the metal felt cold, heavy, like a shackle disguised as jewelry. "You may kiss the bride." Nathan's lips were firm, practiced, empty. The kiss tasted like the end of something. That night, in Nathan's bed, Betty stared at the ceiling while he slept beside her. His breathing was even unbothered. She wondered if Christopher was awake too, if he was staring at his ceiling, if he hated her. Her phone sat on the nightstand, dark and silent. No messages, no last-minute confessions, no rescue. Betty turned it off and closed her eyes, trying to convince herself she'd made the right choice. But conviction required more than logic. It required the absence of doubt, and doubt was all she had left. Christopher Allen didn't become the man he'd promised Betty he'd be. He wanted to. God, he tried. But wanting and achieving were separated by resources, timing, luck variables that refused to align no matter how hard he worked. The startup he'd poured everything into folded 18 months after Betty's wedding. The investor backing fell through. The market shifted. The excuses piled up, each one technically true, collectively devastating. Christopher moved back in with his parents at 25. A temporary setback, he told himself. Just until he figured things out. He never figured things out. By 28, he was working middle management at a company he didn't care about, answering emails that didn't matter, attending meetings that solved nothing. His paycheck was decent. His life was a waiting room with no appointment scheduled. Lindsay appeared at one of those meetings. She was nice, competent, laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. She didn't make his pulse race or his hands sweat. She didn't look at him like he was capable of extraordinary things. She was safe. They started dating because it was easier than being alone. Moved in together because rent was expensive. Got engaged because that's what people did after 3 years. Christopher was 31 when he proposed. It happened in their apartment. No plan. Just a quiet question over Thai food. "Lindsay." She looked up, noodles halfway to her mouth. He pulled the ring from his pocket. Hadn't even rehearsed. "Will you marry me?" Her chopsticks clattered against the bowl. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Yes, yes. She was crying, thanking him, kissing him. Christopher's arms went around her automatically. His mouth said the right things, but inside his chest, nothing. Just a hollow space where joy should have been. He was 31 years old, proposing to a woman he'd never love, because staying alone felt worse than this lie. Christopher married Lindsay the following summer. The ceremony was lovely. His vows were eloquent. His smile looked genuine in the photos. But when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," and Christopher leaned in, he closed his eyes and, for just a second, pretended it was Betty. Lindsay never knew. The marriage wasn't bad. It was just absent. They shared a home, a bed, routines. They were roommates who'd signed a legal contract. Two people running parallel lives that occasionally intersected at breakfast. Lindsay wanted children. Christopher agreed, because he couldn't articulate why he didn't. They tried for a year. Nothing happened. The doctor said there was no medical reason. Sometimes bodies just didn't cooperate. Christopher wondered if his body knew the truth his mind refused to admit. He didn't want to bring children into a life built on resignation. 3 months into the marriage, Betty discovered Nathan's first affair. She wasn't snooping. That implied intent. She was simply existing in a house where secrets left evidence. Lipstick on a collar, receipts from hotels she'd never visited, the faint smell of unfamiliar perfume in his car. Betty stood in the walk-in closet, holding the stained shirt, her hands perfectly still. No trembling, no tears, just a strange, hollow sensation in her chest, like her body was trying to process information her mind had already accepted. Of course he was cheating. Men like Nathan didn't marry for love. They married for image, for alliances, for control. Fidelity wasn't part of the contract. She'd just been naive enough to hope otherwise. When Nathan came home that evening, Betty was sitting in the living room, the shirt folded neatly on the coffee table between them. He saw it, didn't even flinch. "Are we really going to do this?" he asked, loosening his tie, pouring himself a drink. "Do what?" "Pretend you're surprised." Nathan sat across from her, legs crossed, utterly relaxed. "You're intelligent, Betty. You knew what this was." Her throat tightened. "What is this exactly?" "A mutually beneficial arrangement." He sipped his vodka. "I provide for you. You provide legitimacy for me. Everything else is peripheral." "Peripheral," Betty repeated. The word felt sharp in her mouth. "Would you prefer I lie? Sneak around more carefully?" Nathan leaned forward. "I can do that. But I assumed you'd appreciate honesty." There it was again, that twisted version of respect he offered, treating cruelty like clarity. Betty's hands curled into fists on her lap. "And if I'm not okay with this?" Nathan's expression didn't change. "Then you're welcome to leave. Though I assume your mother's treatment is going well?" The threat was implicit, but effective. Betty's jaw clenched. He wasn't just reminding her of their arrangement, he was reinforcing the bars of her cage. "I thought so," Nathan said quietly when she didn't respond. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket. "I have dinner plans. Don't wait up." He left. Betty sat alone in the sprawling living room, surrounded by expensive furniture she hadn't chosen, artwork she didn't understand, wealth that felt more like evidence than comfort. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her mother's care facility. Payment received. Next treatment scheduled. Betty stared at the screen until her vision blurred. This was the trade. Her dignity for her mother's life, her happiness for financial security. The math was simple, brutal, undeniable. Betty set her phone down and walked to the window. The city sprawled below, lights flickering like distant stars. From up here, everything looked clean, solvable, manageable. She wondered what Christopher saw from his windows. Year 7 of Betty's marriage, Nathan stopped pretending. The affairs weren't hidden anymore. He brought women to events, introduced them as associates, colleagues, friends. Everyone knew, Betty included. The humiliation wasn't even subtle, it was policy. At a dinner party, Betty watched Nathan's hand slide to another woman's thigh beneath the table. The woman giggled. Nathan smirked. Betty sipped her wine, face neutral, screaming internally. Across the table, an older woman, someone's wife, someone's trophy leaned close. "You get used to it," she whispered. "Eventually, you stop noticing." Betty's stomach turned. Not because of the infidelity, because of the acceptance, because this woman, and women like her, had normalized a lifetime of this. Is this what survival looked like? Numbness disguised as adaptation? When they got home that night, Nathan poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, turned on the television like nothing had happened. Betty stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Do you even like me?" Nathan looked up, mildly surprised. "What?" "As a person. Do you like me?" He considered the question, which was somehow worse than an immediate no. "I respect you," he finally said. "You're smart, composed. You don't make scenes. That's not an answer. Nathan set down his glass. What do you want me to say, Betty? That I love you? That this is some fairy tale? He laughed, bitter. You married me for money. I married you for legitimacy. We both got what we wanted. Did we? Her voice cracked. Nathan stood, crossed the room, stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back. His hand cupped her face, not gently, not roughly, just clinically. You want honesty? Fine. I don't think about you when you're not in the room. I don't wonder what you're doing, what you're thinking. You're a fixture. A beautiful, expensive fixture. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But you knew that already, didn't you? Betty's vision blurred. She wouldn't cry, refused to give him that. Then why keep me? She whispered. Because leaving requires effort, and you're not important enough to effort. He dropped his hand, stepped back. We're done here. He walked away. Betty stood alone in the foyer, surrounded by marble and mirrors and money that meant nothing. For a moment, just a flicker, Nathan's hand tightened around his glass in the other room. His jaw clenched. Then he poured another drink and the moment passed, buried under years of practiced indifference. Betty climbed the stairs to the bedroom she no longer shared with Nathan. He'd moved to a different wing months ago. She didn't protest. Privacy was the only gift he'd ever given her. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the same position she'd been in for 7 years. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. Mom's doing great. Doctor says she's in remission. Betty stared at the message. Her hands started shaking. Not from relief, from the sudden, terrifying weight of choice she hadn't prepared for. Her mother was okay. Healthy. The reason for all of this, the marriage, the compromise, the slow erosion of her soul was no longer urgent. She could leave, but leave to what? She had no career, no savings of her own, no version of herself that existed outside of this marriage. Nathan had made sure of that. Isolation disguised as luxury. Betty's thumb hovered over the screen. She locked the phone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. 5 years into Christopher's marriage, year 9 of Betty's, they saw each other at a charity gala. Betty spotted him first. He was across the room, talking to a blonde woman in a blue dress. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His suit was nice but not custom. His smile was practiced. He looked tired. He looked like her. Their eyes met across the room. Christopher froze mid-conversation, his expression shifting through surprise, recognition, something else she couldn't name. This time, Betty didn't look away first. This time, she needed to know if the ache was mutual. Christopher excused himself from his group. Betty watched him weave through the crowd, heading toward her. Her pulse quickened. She should leave. Find Nathan. Anything. She didn't move. Betty. His voice. God, she'd forgotten what it sounded like saying her name. She turned slowly, her face arranged into polite neutrality. Christopher, it's been a while. Almost 10 years. He stopped a respectful distance away. Not too close, not familiar, just present. You look. Don't. The word came out sharper than intended. Don't do that. Christopher's jaw worked, nodded. Okay. They stood in silence. Around them, people mingled, laughed, clinked glasses. The world kept moving. How are you? He finally asked. Betty almost laughed. How was she? Trapped in a marriage that felt like a mausoleum? Wealthy beyond measure, and emptier than she'd ever been? Fine, she said. You? Same. They were both lying. They both knew it. I got married, Christopher added, unprompted. Like he needed her to know he'd moved on too. That she wasn't special. I heard. Betty had, actually. Through mutual acquaintances, social media algorithms that refused to let the past stay buried. Congratulations. Thanks. He didn't sound happy about it. You've been married to Nathan Krylov for 9 years. Yes. Betty's fingers tightened around her wine glass. He's here tonight, actually. Somewhere. Christopher's gaze darkened at the name, but he didn't comment. Are you happy? The question was too big, too honest for a conversation in a crowded room. Are you? Betty countered. Christopher looked at her, really looked. The way he used to when they were young and believed in futures they could build together. No, he admitted quietly. Not even a little. Betty's throat tightened. She should walk away. End this conversation before it became something neither of them could take back. Instead, she asked, do you ever wonder what would have happened if... Every day, The confession hung between them. Too raw, too real. But wondering doesn't change anything, Christopher continued, his voice flat. You made your choice. I made mine. We live with them. Do we? Betty's vision blurred. Or are we just surviving? Christopher reached out, hesitated, dropped his hand. I don't think there's a difference anymore. Someone called his name from across the room. The blonde woman in the blue dress, his wife waving him over, oblivious to the wreckage standing between them. I should go, Christopher said. Yeah. He didn't move. Neither did she. For what it's worth, Christopher whispered. I'm sorry, for not being enough, for letting you. Don't apologize for my choices. Betty's voice cracked. I don't get to blame you for this. Christopher nodded, stepped back. Betty's hand shot out, catching his wrist. Wait. He froze. I need to know. Her voice dropped so low he had to lean in. Are you okay? Really okay? Christopher's eyes searched hers. No. Are you? No. They stood like that, her hand on his wrist, his pulse beating against her fingers, an entire conversation happening in the silence. We can't do this here, Christopher said finally. I know, but maybe. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly. Maybe we could talk. Just talk. Coffee or something. Betty should have said no, should have walked away, should have protected what little stability she'd managed to build from the ruins of her choices. Instead, she pulled out her phone. They exchanged numbers without speaking, like teenagers passing notes in class, terrified of being caught. I'll text you, Christopher said. Okay. He walked away. Betty watched him rejoin his wife, watched him smile and nod and pretend everything was fine, just like she did, every single day. But this time, her phone was heavy in her clutch. This time, there was a possibility dangerous, reckless, probably stupid, that the story wasn't over yet. Christopher texted her 3 days later, 2:47 a.m. Betty was awake. She was always awake these days, lying in her separate bedroom, staring at the ceiling while Nathan did whatever Nathan did in his wing of the house. Are you awake? Betty stared at the message, her heart hammered. She should ignore it, delete it, block his number. She typed, yes. Her phone rang immediately. Betty answered without thinking. Hello? I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. Christopher's voice was rough, like he'd been awake for hours too. About surviving versus living. Betty sat up in bed, pulled her knees to her chest. Christopher, I'm not asking for anything, he interrupted. I needed to hear your voice, to know I didn't imagine it, that you're as miserable as I am. Betty's throat burned. I am. Lindsay wants a divorce. The words landed between them like a grenade. What? She told me yesterday. Said she knows I don't love her. That I never did. Christopher laughed, bitter. She's right. And the worst part? I'm relieved. How messed up is that? Betty's hands were shaking. It's not messed up. It's honest. Is it? Or is it just convenient? She's giving me an out. And all I can think about is... He stopped. Is what? Silence. Say it, Betty whispered. You. I'm thinking about you. I've been thinking about you for 10 years, and I thought seeing you would cure it, would prove I'd romanticized the memory. But it didn't. You're not a memory, Betty. You're the thing I measured everything else against, and found wanting. Betty pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Are you crying? Christopher asked softly. No, she lied. Liar. Betty laughed through her tears. My mom's in remission, has been for almost 2 years. What? The whole reason I married him. It's not urgent anymore. Hasn't been for years. And I'm still here. Why? Because leaving requires believing I deserve better. And I'm not sure I do. Her voice cracked. I made this choice, Christopher. I chose this. We were 23, Christopher said fiercely. We were scared kids making impossible choices with incomplete information. That doesn't mean you deserve to spend the rest of your life paying for it. Don't I? No, neither of us does. Betty wiped her eyes. What are we doing? What is this? I don't know. But I know I'm getting divorced. I know I've wasted enough of my life pretending. And I know... He paused. I know that if I don't at least try to find out if we still make sense, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. We might not, Betty whispered. We might be completely wrong for each other now. Maybe. But at least we'll know. Betty looked around her bedroom. Expensive furniture, empty closets, a bed she slept in alone, a life that looked impressive from the outside and felt like slow death from within. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too. What if it's too late?" "Then at least we tried," Christopher said. "That has to count for something." Betty closed her eyes, took a breath, made a decision. Okay, I'll file for divorce. I don't know how long it'll take, or what Nathan will do, or if I'll even survive it emotionally, but I'm done surviving. I want to live." She could hear Christopher's sharp intake of breath. "Betty, don't make promises. Don't tell me it'll be okay. Just be there. When I get to the other side, be there." "I will," Christopher said. "I promise." They stayed on the phone until sunrise, not saying much, just breathing together across the distance. Two people preparing to blow up their lives on the slim hope that honesty might be worth more than safety. 2 weeks after that phone call, Betty stopped pretending. Not dramatically. There was no screaming match, no thrown dishes, no ultimatum. She simply stopped participating, stopped attending events with Nathan, stopped caring when he brought women home, stopped pretending their marriage was anything more than a financial arrangement. Nathan noticed. Of course he did. But his response wasn't concern, it was annoyance. "You're embarrassing me," he said one evening, finding her in the library instead of getting ready for another gala. "The Petrovs are expecting us." Betty didn't look up from her book. "Then go." "Betty, I said go." Nathan. His hand slammed on the table beside her. Not hitting her, just close enough to remind her he could. Betty finally looked up. Her face was calm, empty. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "Hit me? Kill me? You've already done everything else." Nathan's jaw clenched. For a moment, she thought he might actually strike her. Instead, he leaned close, his breath hot against her face. "You think you can just stop? That you're free to do whatever you want?" He laughed, cold. "You're mine, Betty. Legally, socially, financially. You have nothing without me. I have nothing with you either." Her voice didn't shake. "At least this way. I'm honest about it." Nathan straightened, adjusted his cufflinks. "Fine. Rot here. See if I care." He left. Betty sat frozen. Her book was still open in her lap, words blurring together. She couldn't remember what page she was on, couldn't remember why it mattered. Her hands were shaking now. Not from fear, from something else. Something that felt dangerous and clarifying at once. For 9 years, she'd been careful, compliant, controlled. She was done. The next morning, Betty called a lawyer. 3 days later, she filed for divorce. Nathan laughed when he was served the papers. Actually laughed. "You'll regret this," he said, signing them without a fight. Not because he cared about her, but because she had nothing worth keeping. No shared assets, no leverage, just a decade of legal paperwork binding them to nothing. "You'll end up with nothing, just like him." Betty's hands were steady now. "I already have nothing. At least this way, it's mine." 3 weeks after filing for divorce, Betty's world collapsed. Her mother had a heart attack. Massive, sudden. The doctors said nothing could have prevented it, not the treatments, not the remission, nothing. She was gone before Betty made it to the hospital. Betty sat in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, staring at the wall. She'd called her sister. Her sister had called Christopher. Betty found out later, didn't have the energy to be angry about it. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy. Familiar. "Betty." Christopher's voice. She turned slowly. He was standing in the doorway, breathing hard like he'd run up the stairs. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were wild with worry. "You shouldn't be here," Betty whispered. "Your sister called me." Christopher crossed the room, knelt in front of her. "What happened?" Betty laughed a broken, bitter sound. "What happened? I spent 10 years married to a man who treated me like furniture. My mother survived because I sold myself. And now," her voice cracked, "now she's gone anyway. Heart attack. Sudden. The doctors said nothing could have prevented it." Christopher's chest caved. "Betty, all of it was for nothing." Tears spilled down her face. Finally, after years of holding them back. The marriage, the humiliation, giving you up, all of it. And she's still dead. Christopher reached for her hands. They were cold, always cold. "I ruined everything," Betty whispered. "I destroyed us for a future that didn't even happen. You didn't ruin anything. We were kids, scared, making impossible choices. But I chose wrong." Betty met his eyes. I chose money over you, security over love. And I lost everything anyway. Christopher's throat tightened. I lost too, Betty. I married someone I didn't love. Spent a decade pretending. We both made mistakes. Do you hate me? The question was so small, so broken. No. Christopher cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears. I could never hate you. I wish we'd been braver. Betty leaned into his touch, eyes closing. Christopher's thumb traced her knuckles. Still cold. After all these years. Still cold. I used to think about warming your hands, he whispered. Every winter. Wondered if he did. If anyone did. Betty's breath caught. Such a small thing. Such a specific memory. No one did, she admitted. Christopher pulled her close, and Betty finally broke. 10 years of holding herself together, of surviving, of pretending she could breathe in a marriage that suffocated her, it all came pouring out. She cried until she had nothing left. Christopher held her through all of it. What do we do now? Betty finally whispered against his chest. Christopher didn't know. The logistics were still impossible. 2 divorces in process, a decade of damage between them. They weren't the same people. But looking at her, really seeing her, he realized something crucial. Timing had never been their problem. Fear was. We start by being honest, he said quietly. About what we want. What we've always wanted. Betty pulled back enough to meet his eyes. And what if it's too late? Then at least we tried. Betty's divorce finalized on a gray Tuesday in March. She signed the last paper with a steady hand. Her attorney asked if she was okay. I don't know, Betty answered honestly. But I'm free. She walked out of the courthouse with her sister. No celebration. No champagne. Just the strange, disorienting lightness of shedding dead weight. Christopher was waiting by his car. His divorce had finalized 3 weeks earlier. Betty stopped. Her breath caught. You didn't have to. I wanted to. He looked different. Lighter, too. Like they'd both been holding their breath for a decade and finally exhaled. Her sister squeezed her hand, then walked to her own car, giving them space. They stood on the sidewalk. Strangers who knew each other too well. Now what? Betty asked. Christopher smiled, sad but real. I don't know. Coffee? The cafe smelled the same. Coffee and cinnamon and years of conversations soaked into the walls. They sat in their old booth, the corner one, with the cracked vinyl seat that no one ever fixed. Remember when we used to come here every Sunday? Christopher asked. You always ordered the same thing. Black coffee, blueberry muffin. You always stole half my muffin. Betty smiled. Small. Real. Some things don't change. But everything had changed. They both knew it. I don't know if we work anymore, Betty admitted, her coffee going cold between her hands. We're different people. I know. Christopher reached across the table. His hand stopped halfway, asking permission. Betty took it. His palm was warm. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're better different. Betty wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe they could build something new from the ruins of what they'd destroyed. But belief required more than want. I need time, she whispered, to figure out who I am without all of this. Christopher nodded. I'll wait. You shouldn't. I will anyway. They sat like that, hands linked across a table in a cafe that remembered them young, holding on to something that wasn't quite love yet but might be, someday. If they were brave enough. If it wasn't too late. If, 5 years later, Betty sat in a small apartment she'd rented with her own money from a job she'd built from nothing. It wasn't luxurious, wasn't even comfortable, but it was hers. Christopher visited sometimes. They were something. Not quite together. Not quite apart. 2 people learning how to exist without the weight of regret crushing them. Last Tuesday, Christopher came over with takeout. They ate on her apartment floor because she still didn't have a proper dining table. He told her about a project at work. She told him about a woman at the office who reminded her of who she used to be. They didn't kiss, didn't make promises, just existed. Together. Separately. Honestly. When he left, he paused at the door. Same time next week? If you want. I want. It wasn't poetry. Wasn't passion. But it was real. And real mattered more than perfect. On the anniversary of her mother's death, Betty stood at the grave, flowers in hand. I thought I was saving you, she whispered. But I was just saving myself from the fear of losing you. Her phone buzzed. Christopher. Thinking of you today. Coffee later? Betty typed, yes. Not poetry, just yes. She placed the flowers on her mother's grave and walked back to her car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Beautiful, but earned, hard-won, like everything worth having. Years ago, they forced her to choose the safe option, the rich option, the powerful option. And in the end, she learned what her younger self couldn't have known, that some prisons have marble floors and crystal chandeliers, that you can be owned and never touched. That safety without love isn't safety at all, just a slower way to disappear. But starting late was still starting, and maybe, just maybe, that was its own kind of brave. I'm not going to tell you to subscribe or hit the bell. You just heard a story about two people who spent 10 years making choices out of fear instead of honesty. If this meant something to you, you'll come back. And if you want to talk about it, I'll read your comment. But right now, just sit with it, and maybe ask yourself, what choice have I been too scared to make? I'll be here.